going on, guys? Welcome into the Relay with Russ Dorsey. Thanks for tuning in wherever you are. Episode 3. Guys, we made it through 3 of these things, 4 if you include episode 0. And I am really excited once again to talk to everybody out there. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, thanks for listening and tuning in. Thanks for following the podcast on there so you can get a download each and every week. If you're watching on YouTube, because we are also on YouTube, I want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Guys, I got to let you know, in a little bit over 2 weeks, we've already gotten to 100 subscribers on the YouTube. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And that seems like a low number, guys, but I'm telling you, I did not think we'd be at 100 subscribers in 2 weeks. So I want to say thank you to each and every person who has subscribed to the YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure you are liking the videos. Leave a comment, your favorite team, something you want to ask me that we can talk about here on the podcast. But I wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you for subscribing to the YouTube channel, and the road to 200 begins, right? Like we hit that goal of 100. Now we got to keep this thing growing, keep pushing and get it to 200. So make sure you are sharing the podcast on whatever platform, but definitely on the YouTube with your friends who love the game of baseball. And if they know and love Russ Dorsey baseball information and content and knowledge about the game, make sure you tell them about the Relay with Russ Dorsey. Also, if you want to ask me a question about baseball or life, you can make sure you can do that on the podcast email, relaywithruss@gmail.com. That is relaywithruss@gmail.com. I actually have another really good question this week that we'll do at the end of the podcast. But if you want to ask me a question to get answered here on the pod, you can do it at the email address, relaywithruss@gmail.com. Okay, guys, we have a lot of things to talk about on this week's episode of the podcast. A lot of things have been going on in Major League Baseball. We are now officially into the second full week of the season, and things are moving, things are happening. We are now getting into a rhythm, full swing of things. And you know, you got games already getting banged because of weather in different parts of the country. You got cold fronts coming through and teams moving games up because, you know, you can't have guys out there in 25 degrees. And we're going to see some of that, you know, across Major League Baseball this week. You have, 70-degree days one day in Chicago where I live, and then you go have a 40-degree day the next day. So we are getting a little bit of everything, but the baseball has been nonstop. The storylines are coming in, and the biggest storyline from the last 7 days since we last spoke here on the podcast, Konnor Griffin, #1 prospect in Major League Baseball, making his long-awaited debut. Now, for everybody out there, Konnor Griffin, #1 prospect in baseball for the Pittsburgh Pirates, shortstop, and he's the youngest high schooler to debut, I believe, since 1994. The youngest American to debut in a big league game since Bryce Harper, and the youngest period since Juan Soto. So you're talking about a very select group of young players. And to be 19 years old and making it to the big leagues, it is insane. 2 years ago, guys, Konnor Griffin was a 17-year-old graduating from Jackson Prep in Jackson, Mississippi, and now he's in the big leagues playing shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's truly a wild story, but that just tells you just how talented, Konnor Griffin is. I know we talked about it in one of our emailers asked about, prospects that they should be looking out for, and I said Konnor Griffin is coming to the big leagues very soon. I didn't think it would be a couple of days after the podcast dropped, but I did realize that guy's really good. He's a really good player, and it was going to be hard to keep him in AAA after they decided not to have him break camp with the big club. A couple of days go by. I know people are kind of like, if he was that ready after 4 days, you could have just let him start with the big club. I don't disagree with that necessarily, but they decided to do that. But now he's in the big leagues, makes his debut against the Baltimore Orioles, batting 7th. They didn't have him hit too high. You don't want to put that much pressure on the 19-year-old. But he comes up, and I think the thing I was so impressed about watching his debut, because I watched about 90% of that game, his first at bat. Actually, before his first at bat, he starts a nice 6-4-3 double play, so he's getting involved in the action defensively, and then he comes up in the next inning with a runner on base, and he sees two nasty sweepers from Kyle Bradish, both on the outer third going out of the zone, and he takes two big swings in the first two pitches of the at-bat. And then Kyle Bradish, when watching this at-bat, you're saying, okay, they're clearly showing Konnor Griffin a lot of respect here because they didn't come at him with fastballs. They just said, no, welcome to the big leagues, kid. Here comes two nasty breaking balls. And then he gets a breaking ball on the inner third of the plate, stays on it, and drills it into the left center field gap for an RBI double for his first big league hit in his first big league at bat. His family was going crazy. The fans in Pittsburgh were going crazy because they're like, man, after waiting, the time is now. We now have the crown jewel of our farm system, the crown jewel in minor league baseball playing in the big league. So a really cool moment there for Konnor Griffin. The first weekend, that was his only hit. That RBI double in his first at bat. He ended up going 1 for 9 in the weekend, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts. So he wasn't overwhelmed. It wasn't like he was 1 for 9 with 8 punch outs. 1 for 9, had 2 walks in there, 2 strikeouts. He's been putting the ball in play. But yeah, man, the excitement that you feel from fans in Pittsburgh, it's palpable, right? You can feel it. And you could see it on display. Sold out the entire weekend there in Pittsburgh. And you see Konnor Griffin, and I think this is one of the most impressive things to me about him. You obviously know the tools. Big-time power and speed. He hit 20 homers last year. He swiped 60 bags as an 18-year-old in the minor leagues, had a 950 OPS. So the numbers back it up. But it's the physicality of Konnor Griffin that really stands out. He's 6'3", 222 pounds. Like, you're talking about a grown man. I know he's 19, but that's a grown man, wide receiver, strong safety, playing shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so it's so easy to see why scouts and front office looked at him as a first rounder and said, yeah, this is going to be an absolute monster. He played football there in Mississippi, and you're seeing a guy that you're saying, clearly this was a two-sport athlete, whether it was football or basketball or whatever he decided to do. You could say with that frame, he was going to be successful. And you see what that projection could be. It's like when he continues to get older and learns how to, you already say at 6'3", 222, like, you don't need to really fill your frame out anymore, but the guys start to get in the gym a little bit more, do some different things, and you're talking about a guy that could easily turn himself into a 30, 35 homer guy with the big-time speed, and that is a truly dynamic player as a shortstop. So Konnor Griffin making his debut in the big leagues. I know, looking at where the Pittsburgh Pirates are, this is my thing when I'm thinking about the Pittsburgh Pirates and I'm thinking about Konnor Griffin coming up, and you have all this excitement in the city of Pittsburgh. The time is now for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And what I mean by that is this. You have arguably the best starting pitcher on the face of the earth in Paul Skeens, or 1A if you say it's Tarek Skubal in Detroit. Paul Skeens is 1A. You have a young rotation of big-time arms, whether it's Braxton Ashcraft, whether it's Bubba Chandler, Mitch Keller still in that rotation. They have this young kid, Seth Hernandez, in the minor leagues throwing 103 miles an hour. He's probably going to get fast-tracked to the big leagues at some point, and there's nothing more coveted than young, controllable starting pitching. And the Pittsburgh Pirates have that right now. Then you also have the number one prospect in baseball in Konnor Griffin that you just promote to the big leagues. You have him starting at shortstop every day now. And you look at this team and you say, man, this could be the time where we're talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates potentially being a sneaky wild card team. And I say sneaky. I know they've been the sexy pick for some people because of the starting pitching. I'm just curious to see if they can score enough runs. I think they're going to be able to pitch because of the names I just mentioned. When you have Paul Skeens starting every fifth day, you're going to have an opportunity to win a lot of ball games. But I just want to be able to see it. They've added to their lineup. They went out and got Brandon Lau this offseason. You went out and got Ryan O'Hearn. Both of those guys have, added a punch to their lineup. O'Neal Cruz has been swinging the bat really well. He's having some issues defensively, which we're going to have to talk about at some point because 10, 12 days into the season, the center field experiment does not seem to be going well. But that's another story for another day. But he has been swinging the bat. And that was something we talked about. Could he be a guy that really stood out in that lineup and added some length to it? And then you have Konnor Griffin. Like, you're not expecting him to carry that lineup, but the talent's there, the tools are there, and he's going to be able to do some special things wherever they decide to hit him along the way. And for a city in Pittsburgh that is a great baseball town, that is a great sports town, so much baseball history, and they've gotten to the postseason. You might not believe this, but this is accurate. They've gotten to the postseason a total of 3 times in the last 33 years. Now, wherever you're listening or you're watching the podcast, you're like, Russ, that's crazy. That has to be wrong. It is not. If you want to go to Baseball Reference and fact check me, please do that. 3 postseason appearances in 33 years, and all 3 of those appearances were consecutive. 2013, 2014, 2015, like you're talking that Andrew McCutchen golden age of Pirates baseball in the 2010s. And that was it. After the Barry Bonds era, and Andy Van Slyke and those guys in the 90s, it was a long time, before they got back to the postseason. And now it's been a long time since they've been to the postseason after that, since 2015. And now you have a team where it's like, these guys have talent. They have starting pitching. They have athleticism. They've added some thump into their lineup. And you look at that team and say, man, some things go their way, and they could be a team that's playing meaningful games in September. And so for the Pittsburgh Pirates, they have not had a ton of success. They've had a fan base that has been begging their ownership group to spend some money. And they spent a little bit of money, this offseason, especially on a guy like a Ryan O'Hearn, and they were trying to get in on some other guys, and they did want to add. But now is going to be the time, right? Like, if they're going to be able to continue to play good baseball, which they've played decent baseball here in the first couple of weeks of the season, I'm interested to see what they do, especially as we get closer to the deadline here in the next few months. But Konnor Griffin's debut, really exciting time for the Pittsburgh Pirates and Pirates fans. Now, early in the season, a lot of things are going to happen. You're going to see teams get off to hot starts. You're going to see teams have cold stretches. We've seen that as well. But you're also going to see guys who are already banged up. And you're going to see some injuries. And we have seen, especially when it comes to starting pitching, plenty of injuries. And some pretty big names as well. Hunter Brown in Houston Astros ace Hunter Brown going on the IL with a right shoulder strain. That's not great. Cade Horton, the Chicago Cubs, him having a right forearm injury that forces him to the IL. Anytime you hear about right forearm inflammation or strains or anything like that with a starting pitcher, your mind can't help but go to the worst, and things like Tommy John surgery and UCL revisions, those different type of things. So you're hoping for the best for Cade Horton. I know the Cubs are hoping for the best for Cade Horton, but not what you want to see when you see a guy pull himself out of a start in just the second start of the season. Matthew Boyd also going on the IL the day this podcast was recorded. Now, it sounds like they think it's going to be a short stint, but that's 2 starters in less than 2 days that you've lost if you're the Chicago Cubs. And we talk about it all the time, starting pitching depth. Like, I repeat it all the time. I know people get tired of it, but it's true. Starting pitching depth is what you need to get through a 162-game season, to get through the 6-month grind that is the regular season, if you want to be a team that gets to the postseason. Because, it's really hard to get through 6 months thinking, oh, we just need 5 guys. Like, you need more than 5 starting pitchers to get through a season. I would say you need between 9 and 12 starters, right? At least guys to at least make a start for you. Now, how that's divvied up depends on a lot of different factors. You want 4 or 5 guys to make the bulk of those, but you're gonna need those depth pieces from AAA. You're gonna need some, long guys to throw some bulk of innings for you. So you're gonna need more than the guys that you project out to be your starting rotation to make it through a full season. Cody Ponce with the Toronto Blue Jays going down with an ACL injury. That one was scary because you didn't know if it's an Achilles, if it's a knee, and comes to find out it is a knee. So we'll see the severity of that injury if he has to, he is going to go on the IL. He is on the IL, but now see what the course of action will be if he tries to rehab it or get ACL surgery, which would put him out for the season. Justin Verlander. This is one where it's just like, the Father Time is undefeated, and we've seen Justin have a long career, and I imagine Justin is going to be just fine because he's one of those guys that is the exception and not the rule when it comes to age and pitching in the big leagues. He's pitched in the big leagues for 20 years now. So, but when you are in your 40s and you're pitching, you're going to have some things that you feel, and you're better off early in the season to be safe than sorry. So he goes on the IL for the Tigers, but I expect to see Justin Verlander pitching again. But that's one of the things that you're going to have to watch. When you have a guy that's in his 40s making starts, he's going to have some things that are barking just because of age. So Justin Verlander, another guy on that list. Johan Oviedo with the Boston Red Sox, a guy that's going down with an elbow injury. That's not what you want to see. Basically, the entire Atlanta Braves rotation, in whatever order you want to put them in, those guys are banged up. Like, it's really Chris Sale and friends right now in Atlanta in their rotation. And it's one of those things where this has been since spring training, whether it's Spencer Strider, Spencer Schwellenbach, AJ Smith-Shawver, Hurston Waldrop, who had a really solid 2025 season, in his rookie year and really showed a lot of things. He's on the IL. Joey Wentz on the IL. And so the Braves are in a situation where you're one injury away from having to make an acquisition. Some would argue they might be in that position right now. That's where, they didn't have a ton of starting pitching depth anyway, and then their guys who were getting healthy or were coming off for injury got hurt again or now banged up again, and it starts to become too much to take, because that puts a lot of pressure on your lineup to have to put up a lot of runs. And their lineup has been doing their thing, and Drake Baldwin, what he's been able to do to start the season, and Ronald Acuna Jr. looks healthy. But at the same time, you can't expect your lineup to have to put up 5-6 runs a game, and Chris Sale to have to carry, your rotation, even though that's something that he will always try to do, is carry a rotation. But you just hope, if you're the Atlanta Braves, that you can get healthy sooner rather than later and get 1-2 of those guys back to kind of stop the bleeding there. But starting pitching depth is something that is much needed for a lot of teams around the big leagues right now. I look at the Chicago Cubs, and the Cubs are in a position where, when you look at how their season ended, when they got to the postseason, they simply didn't have enough starting pitching, right? They didn't have enough guys that they were confident in could go out and start a game for them. They didn't have Cade Horton at the end of the season when he was their best starting pitcher going into the postseason. He goes down with an injury, isn't able to start. You had Shota Imanaga having to start games for you at a time where he probably shouldn't have been starting games, but they didn't have tons of options. Jameson Taillon, making starts for them. Matthew Boyd, in that rotation, and they didn't have Edward Cabrera at the time. And so then you go into the offseason and you say, yeah, we need to add another arm. You go make the move for Edward Cabrera. You're like, okay, we're going to get Cade Horton back healthy. You bring Shota Imanaga back, and then you say, we're going to get Justin Steele back in this rotation, who they lost for all of 2025, in late May, early June. But like we talked about last week on the podcast, you just never know, right? And there you try to stay as healthy as possible. You try to give guys extra rest. When we were talking about that 6-man rotation, one of the reasons you give guys extra rest is to keep guys fresh and healthy. But baseball it's hard to keep starting pitchers healthy, and some teams are getting tested very early with their starting pitching depth. Now, another thing we've been seeing in Major League Baseball, and you've been seeing it on different broadcasts, watching games, is the ABS system, automatic balls and strikes. And we got to see a little bit of it during spring training this year and last year, players getting to use it and kind of see how it works, counts to do it in. And I would say that whoever you talk to, whether it is players, whether it is managers, executives, the league, I would say that everybody is pretty happy with how smoothly it's gone so far. Now, I know you could say, Russ, I don't know if umpires are necessarily happy. I think if you talk to a lot of umpires, yeah, they want to get things done correctly. I think we've seen in the case of C.B. Buckner, we've seen an umpire have a bad game or two where it's like, yeah, the ABS system made you look bad on this day. But every player I've talked to about ABS, the biggest theme is guys have a good understanding of the strike zone for the most parts when you're in the big leagues. It's trying to do away with the egregious strike call or the egregious called ball, right? Most hitters understand a quarter of an inch off the plate in whatever direction is likely going to be called a strike. That's why when you're watching games, there are guys that are like, nah, I'm not even going to worry about challenging something that is what we've known for a long time as a borderline ball or borderline strike. But it's the ones that are a foot out of the zone or 6 inches off the plate that are getting called balls or strikes where you're like, all right, I'm going to tap the top of my helmet and we're going to challenge that. I think players have, I know players have big time respect for umpires because they know that umpires are back there for 3 hours watching between 300 and 350 pitches a night, and they're getting above 90% of those pitches called correctly. But it's just figuring out, can you do away with the 1% or less than 1% of those pitches that are called egregiously out of the zone or in the zone? So I think that's been a big time success for Major League Baseball. I think that's been something that has been a smooth transition. It's been something that I think, whether it is catchers behind the plate or hitters figuring out how to use it, when to use it. I've talked to some guys that said, hey, I'm probably not going to use it unless we're in one of those leverage situations, runners on base, late in games. You're not going to see me use it on an 0-0 count with nobody on base, even though there are some guys that haven't quite figured out the strategy. And you've already had some teams that have said we've had some meetings talking about when to use it. But heat of the moment, you're going to have some guys that say, hey, I'm tapping the helmet. That was a ball or that was a strike if you're the catcher. But yeah, I think there are a lot of guys that are like, hey, I know what the strike zone is. And I think that's one of my favorite parts watching is who has a really good command of the strike zone. Like, who knows what this umpire's zone is. And you can see how quickly big league hitters adjust and can kind of discern what a zone is, what an umpire zone is in the moment. I also enjoy watching catchers who have been watching thousands of pitches throughout their career and know what a ball is, what a strike is, and can quickly say, nope, that was a ball, or nope, that was a strike. And you see that really quickly in real time. So ABS, I would call that a big time win for Major League Baseball. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how we see it in, we haven't had the leverage moment. We've seen a walk-off ABS challenge where, I believe it was Samuel Basallo in an Orioles game challenged a pitch and he was correct and then the game ended. We haven't seen a big time moment yet when it comes to ABS and maybe changing an inning. But you do see that from time to time where maybe it's a 2-1 pitch that's called a strike and then you challenge. Now it's a 3-1 pitch. That changes the complexity of an entire at bat, right? Like that changes what pitch is called, where a pitcher can go in the strike zone, what a catcher is looking for, what a hitter is looking for. So I like ABS and the new dynamic that is added to games. So I'm adding a new segment here this week on The Relay with Russ Dorsey. And this is a segment I came up with. And if you know me, and a lot of my friends who are listening can attest to this, if I see somebody I know, I say, oh, that's my guy, right? And it got to the point where I was joking with some friends where it's like, it doesn't even have to be like a quote unquote friend. It could be an acquaintance and I say my guy. And it's just, I say it out of habit, like, oh, that's my guy. But it's usually I say that for somebody I know. But I was thinking of each and every week, there's going to be somebody that stands out. And what's a good type of segment to have? So I'm going to start doing my guy of the week. And this week, there is no better candidate than Joe Adell of the Los Angeles Angels, who robbed not one, not two, but 3 home runs against the Seattle Mariners, robbing Cal Raleigh, Josh Naylor, and J.P. Crawford. That's what a performance from Joe Adell. And it was so funny. The next day in the Seattle Mariners clubhouse, and my man Daniel Kramer, who covers the Mariners for MLB.com, took a picture, and their whiteboard says, "Don't hit it to Joe Adell." Which, that's got to be the strategy after a guy robs 3 homers. But an amazing defensive performance. Also want to shout out Kaylee Krause, who took a picture. The last homer, when he robbed J.P. Crawford, he fell into the stands in right field, and she got a picture of Joe Adell holding up his glove with the ball in it, standing behind him at Angel Stadium. It was an awesome picture, an awesome moment, an awesome defensive performance. And I think you can make the case. Some people were saying, is that the greatest defensive game in the history of Major League Baseball? And it's like when you rob 3 homers, like that's some guys, you're lucky when you get 1, but to get 3 in a game as closely together as he got, like that he has a really good case. He has a really good case. But shout out to my guy of the week, Joe Adell. All right, let's get to some emails before we get out of here on this week's episode of The Relay with Russ Dorsey. Okay, this one from Carl. Carl says, Russ, what do you think the Marlins should do about their attendance problem? Baseball is riding a wave right now, but the Marlins are only drawing about 6,500 fans. Carl, thanks for the email. I really appreciate it. You ask a good question, because 6,500 fans is not what you want to see if you are a big league team, if you're the league. And you're right, baseball is riding a big time wave where people are going to the ballpark, attendance is up, viewership is up, and baseball's in a really good place. I think winning cures a lot of things, and I think winning helps attendance. And I think last year you saw a Marlins team that was a lot better than I believe people realized. They won 79 games. And while that doesn't sound like, oh, that's not 95 wins. No, it's not. But from where they've been at the last couple of years to all of a sudden you hire a new manager in Clayton McCullough, who clearly had his team ready to play for 162 games, right? They were playing meaningful games in September. They knocked the Mets out of the postseason that last week of the season. And look, when you win games, people go to the ballpark. That's the reality of it. Like, I know they've had some attendance issues down there in the new ballpark, but I think you saw, and I know it's a little bit different, but you saw during the World Baseball Classic what that place looks like when it's packed out. And I don't think that you can make that your goal, but when you put a product on the field that people want to see, people will go to the ballpark. So if the Marlins keep winning, people are going to start going. They're currently 6-3. They're playing good baseball. They have a group of really young, talented players that are starting to make their mark in the big leagues. They've always been able to develop starting pitching. And I do think they have a manager that is doing a really nice job in Clayton McCullough with a really young group. So if Peter Bendix and company continue to put a product and put players on the field that can go out there and win ball games, you don't have to win 99, 100 games to necessarily get people to the ballpark. Like, if they start to look like a team that can win 85 games and you're knocking on the door of the postseason, which they were at the end of the last year. They didn't obviously make it. They won 79 games, though. And so when you're still in the hunt column in September, that means you're doing something right. If the Marlins can keep winning ball games, I believe they're going to get more people in the seats there at Lone Depot Park in Miami. You might not get 35,000, but you got to get that number into the upper teens if they can. Guys, that's going to do it for this week's episode of The Relay with Russ Dorsey. Thank you to everybody out there for listening through the first 3, and if you count episode 0, 4 episodes of this podcast. The support has been amazing, and it's meant a lot to me, guys. Like, you don't know, behind the scenes, this is something that I'm doing with very, very little help, that I said, you know what, I think this is the time to do it, and I'm going to do it. And you guys could not be more gracious with your time and your listening to the podcast on whatever platform, or you are watching the podcast on YouTube and you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you so much, because it means a lot to me, and it means a lot for the podcast and the growth and success of it. And so I really appreciate each and every one of you who are listening or watching for being a part of this thing, because you are a very important part of the success of The Relay with the Russ Dorsey. You can listen on Apple or Spotify. When you do, make sure you follow the podcast so you get the download each and every week. Give the podcast 5 stars, leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave us a comment of where you're from, where you're watching from, what your favorite team is. And if you have a question for me, leave that in the comments, and we can read that here on the podcast in a future episode. Also, if you want to ask me a question about baseball or whatever you may want to ask me, also adjacent to baseball, as long as it's appropriate, relaywithruss@gmail.com. That's relaywithruss@gmail.com. If you want to ask me a question on the podcast, that is the best way to do it. Or if you want to advertise with the Relay with Russ Dorsey, please feel free to put that inquiry in the email, relaywithruss@gmail.com. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Enjoy all the baseball action this week, and we will catch you next time.